Hello humans, today I want to talk about this guy right here. This is one of the oldest designs in my knife collection, the Otter Mercador folding knife. The version of this that is going to be most well recognized is going to be called the K55 Black Cat. K55K Black Cat, sorry. But it does come in multiple other variants, including a plain black stainless steel version, this brass version, a copper version, Damascus combinations. I think there's a Cerakote steel version. Like this comes in a lot of different variations is what I'm getting at, which is kind of cool. But to be honest, this knife's main sort of party trick is how long the design has been in use. So this knife, and moreover the company itself, so Otter, was opened in and around 1840 in Solin, Germany. Solin, I don't know. This design, however, was not part of their original manufacture. This knife was originally made by H.Y. Kaufman, and it was produced by his company from around 1867, so almost 100 years before the Buck 110 was invented. 1867 to about 1995 when the company was purchased by Otter Messer. Obviously, a lot of my pronunciation is going to be off, and I do apologize for that. If you are German speaking, feel free to laugh at me in the comments, because I do understand that this is going to be pretty rough, but this knife was produced from about 1867 and has been in production since then, including through both World Wars. And one of the main reasons why this knife actually gained popularity here in North America was through the Second World War. After the Second World War, a lot of American GIs came back from the war sporting these knives. They were never officially part of the kit of the German military or the Third Reich or any other military organization that operated in Germany, but it's kind of like a Swiss Army knife. Even if it's technically not issued, a lot of people are going to carry one, or more modernly, like a Leatherman. There are certain knives that are just seen across battlefields in the world, and this was one of them because it was a highly practical, lightweight folding knife. So yeah, after World War II, a lot of troops brought them back, mostly in the K55 Black Cat variant, which this is not. Like I said, this is the brass version. There should be a K55 version that has appeared on the screen already. And yeah. So this has been around for quite a while. The name, the K55K, it's kind of like a factory reference code, like what Chevy does to name their vehicles. The original K is for the maker Kaufman. 55 is the address where the knives themselves were originally made in Solling, Germany. I feel like I'm pronouncing it as if it were a Chinese city, Shaolin, but I don't think it is. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. My apologies. But yeah, 55 is the original street address where the knives themselves were made, and the second K is for the German word for cat. So K55K with the backward second K is it's sort of like manufacturer name, area of manufacture, model name for cat. It does come in two different versions. This one here in particular is the stainless steel version. It has 1.4034 steel, which is a German-made steel. It's roughly equivalent to 240C, which is a very popular steel seen on buck knives and other budget knives. I am going to get into why I have a little bit of a problem with that, but it's not a horrible steel on a budget knife. The problem is that this is not necessarily a budget knife. In terms of other manufacturing, they all feature this folded over handle design, which makes them technically integrals, along with pin construction instead of torques or anything like that. So there's very little adjustment or modification that you can make to it, which isn't the end of the world by any means. It locks up completely solid, and I mean, for traditional, it feels fine. Back springs, it's definitely not weak. And it does lock out solid, which is nice. There are some quirks of manufacturing. One of the big ones is you can see that line right there for the grind on the back lock isn't actually straight. The blade itself wasn't actually ground straight. You can see ever so slightly up there near the tip. Or not the tip, the pivot pin there. The actual blade was more ground on one side than it was on the other, and it did not come. I know I could technically take a mallet and fix this, but it did not come centered out of the box and has not been centered since I've gotten it, which makes sense. The actual brass of the handle, I did get the brass version. I like brass the most. It also comes in a copper version, and like I said, steel and all that shebang. There's massive pricing differences between them. I'm going to talk in euros because import fees and all that just make this all weird, but it's 30. The stainless steel version, the painted stainless steel version, starts out at $35 or 35 euros, whereas the brass version starts out at like 65 euros. And with the K55K marking on the stainless steel version, it starts at 44 euros. Again, brass starts out at 46 or 65, and copper actually starts out at 69 euros. It goes up depending on other versions. There are versions with pocket clips. This one here does not. This is very true to the original version with the lockback and no pocket clip, but the lanyard. But the version with the pocket clip ups that price. There's Damascus versions. Honestly, for value, the Damascus version almost seems like a better value because it's not tons more when you're talking the brass, which is just kind of weird. But they do tons of variations of it, and the pricing is just kind of all over the place. But fundamentally, you're not buying this knife to make a very practical knife. This is going to be a long-lasting and effective tool. And to that effect, it does a really good job. It has a very simple drop point blade, very thin, very slicey grind. It's extremely easy to poke into stuff and make cuts with it. I've used this for food prep, especially in environments where weight is paramount. Obviously, full metal handles are going to add some weight. Brass and copper especially are heavier. But the stainless steel version is quite lightweight, and it's so thin that it actually is an easy tool to use it's easy to carry, and it's fairly easy to use even in those extreme lightweight environments, which not a lot of knives are. It is a little bit uncomfortable if you're cutting through like wood or heavy material processing just because it is so thin, but it is by far not the worst thing in the world. And it does have a couple of nice features for its design. One of the big ones is actually this finger guard right here. It makes a very effective stop for your hand, and because it does swell out towards the pinky, you can actually get an extremely good grip on this, even though it is a very thin knife, which for lighter weight tasks makes it quite comfortable. You also have a leather lanyard loop along with this brass, I don't know what they're called, but oh, my leather's messed up. Works a whole hell of a lot better when everything is straight, which is not true of everything, but is true today. So you can tighten it down onto your wrist just to make sure that it is not going to go anywhere, which is quite nice. You can also do it the other way, tighten it into your wrist from the blade and then have a little bit more room. But if you're on a boat or something like that, having a knife that you can just kind of dangle without worrying about it is and can be incredibly convenient. Or if you're working in a cold environment with gloves on, you just need the blade to be hanging out, but you don't always need it in your hand. Again, a lanyard is a great thing because it can just kind of dangle off your wrist while you do something with your hands, grab the knife again, do your work without ever having to deal with opening and closing, which can be quite difficult on a nail nick knife with gloves on. But overall, yeah, it's design-wise very simple. It's extremely historical. It's been around for an extremely long time, which does make it fairly interesting. It has a very efficient blade for cuts and slices. I have been using it. I'm not going to go through all of my standard sort of blade tests, but from what I remember, keep in mind I've had this knife a year and a half now. From what I remember from when I got it, it had a good edge out of the box. The refinements for the knife part of the knife are fine. There's definitely some QC issues that I've noticed. In particular with, like I said, it doesn't go into the handle straight, the grind's a little bit wonky, but the final cutting edge was very good, and the heat treat has treated me well. It has felt fine. Nothing to write home about, obviously enough, but it is pretty okay. Yeah, for lightweight tasks, it's perfectly fine, very comfortable. For heavier duty tasks, I don't think it's great. To be honest, the biggest downside of this knife here in North America is it just feels a little bit outdated. There's a lot more modern stuff that's easy to carry and more comfortable than it, which has kind of forced it into this weird spot where unless you're doing like cosplay, and this is actually a really cool knife, like if you have a cosplay for a historical character or like something that would fit this, it is a very nice piece to add to a cosplay. But for historical knives, there's not really a zone unless they do something well or interesting. Like the Buck 110, obviously, is just extremely robust and comfortable. It's got that nice chunky handle that makes it very, very nice to use, even for an extended period of time because it's so thick. It almost feels like you're working with a fixed blade in many ways, right? Which is very, very nice. However, this is so thin that you really can't escape the feel of it being a thin object. And other historical knives, like Swiss Army knives, can have a multitude of tools on them, which in turn kind of ups them higher than this thing can ever be, which is kind of unfortunate. It is a nice knife. I do like this knife, but it is very far from perfect in that regards. Let's do some size comparisons real quick. Here we have it next to the Civivi Chevalier and the Wee Banter. As you can see, it is bigger than the Banter. It is slight, unless you include the D-loop, which I'm not going to. It is pretty much the same size as the Civivi Chevalier, with essentially the same amount of edge. It does feel longer than it is just because of how slim of a profile it is, but there you go. And next to our Buck 110, it is quite a bit smaller than the Buck 110, and next to a Zippo as well. So yeah, it is very comfortably into what I consider to be a medium-sized knife, very, very average medium-sized knife, which is pretty cool, but it is incredibly thin. Like this is less than half of the thickness of the Buck 110, which makes it very easy to carry, but not necessarily the most comfortable object in the world. And here it is next to our Zippo. Very, very thin. It is a little bit ugly with time, the way that it's patinaed, just because they have some type of a, I don't know what it is, but there's some type of a coating on the brass itself, and you can see where it has started to wear away. It's very unfortunate. I would prefer it if they just gave us like raw brushed brass, because then it would patina more naturally, and I think it would look a whole hell of a lot better. But they didn't, and with enough time, it is going to wear down and start to look really, really good. It's just going to take longer for that natural patina to sort of set in and for it to start looking its prime. Yeah, I mean, it's an object that's worth having, and I think it does round out any sort of knife collection because this was the first mass-produced knife with a lock on it by a very, very long, like, there's nothing else in the world that was being mass-produced at the time that had a lock on it. You had Roman bully knives, which predate this a little bit, but they were all custom-made. There wasn't any large manufacturers that were making them. And it's still in continuous production, which is just kind of cool. So I do think that if you're looking for a knife, if you have a knife collection, if you have any interest in this knife hobby, it is worth picking one up. I personally, if that was like the only reason I was interested in this thing, I would pick up specifically either the K55 Black Cat or just a straight black stainless steel version, because the savings on it make it worth it. Me, I like brass, and I could see some cosplays that would accentuate themselves with a piece like this, so I picked up the brass version. The copper version being the most expensive is a little bit weird to me. But yeah, it's not great for the money, but I do think that as part of respecting your heritage, filling out a collection, it is worth owning one. Nail Nick works great. I mean, it's easy to use, easy to manipulate. If you hand one to a kid, they can do a perfectly fine job with it. The only thing for smaller and weaker hands is that it does have a little bit of a stiff lock, but it would be a suitable thing to hand to a kid because it'll teach them all the basic skills that they need. It's fairly comfortable for smaller hands. There's nothing distinctly right with it, but there's also nothing distinctly wrong with it, which is why I'm having kind of a hard time giving a recommendation for it. But yeah, if you're interested in knives, I say you should pick one up. Not because I think you'll get tons of use out of it, but because I do think it is important and an interesting piece of history. The same way that if you're into lighters, you should look for an early, um, oh my god, now I forgot, an early Ronson model, along with Zippos and the like. So I do just think that, yeah, it's cool. It's cool from a knife guy history. It's a cool knife. It's not interesting in today's modern landscape, but looking back at it historically and looking at how long it survived, it is pretty cool. And being the first mass-produced locking knife ever is just awesome. So yeah, that's kind of all I had to say about it. I really appreciate this thing. Stay safe and have fun out there. Peace.